All right, everyone. So this is our first AP Human Geography review session live. So I know it's kind of early. We'll see if anybody ends up joining up for the review session. If you do happen to join up and you want to be a part of the conversation, there's specific things that you would like for me to address as we are going through the different material, anything specific you want me to look at. I'd be more than happy to do that. Just pop in there and ask a question. I'm going to be getting some things set up here. So what I would imagine is that you guys are just now starting the year. You're getting into Unit 1. So when we look at Unit 1 and we look at the beginning of the course, what you guys should be addressing is what's called the basics of geography. And what we have to remember about the basics of geography is what your teacher is trying to do is or at least they should be trying to do, is they should be trying to establish really the idea of creating geographic perspective. And so we can create geographic perspective in a variety of different ways. And so really when you look at the idea of creating that geographic perspective, the whole purpose is you're trying to study space. And you're trying to study human interactions with space. And so that's why obviously the map is going to be a huge tool that you should be able to understand and utilize for studying the space and the human interactions with that space. And so that's why your teacher's going to go through the different types of maps with you. I don't imagine that you've gotten to all the different types of maps, but you will need to pay attention to that. I wouldn't say so much that you need to pay attention to just regular maps when it comes to trying to think of them off the top of my head. Just a regular map as opposed to thematic maps. The thematic maps are going to be more important to you because those are the ones that are going to help you to understand data, help you to understand the distribution of data. Things along those lines. So make sure that you pay attention to the different types of thematic maps, how you read them. When it comes to map projections, really the important thing there is just understanding that maps are distorted, that even though we try to make them as perfect as we can, there's no way to make them perfect. And so understanding that there are those distortions, and it's really more about understanding the conversation that exists about what types of distortions there are, the decision making that map makers have to make in order to understand those distortions and how that's going to impact your understanding of the space. If we talk about what the most important map projections are, it's my understanding, and based on what I've seen, that really there's 3 map projections that you want to pay attention to, and that is going to be the Mercator projection, the Robinson projection, and the Gall-Peters projection. The Mercator projection, because it's really the first one that is of use to a lot of people. You used to find it in old textbooks, and also a lot of people like to make fun of it. They like to make fun of it because of the distortion of the size, things along those lines. And it was made by Europeans, and so I like to make fun of it because it's Eurocentric. And so people like to throw a lot of negative comments about it. Then you have the Robinson projection. The Robinson projection, because it's not necessarily the most accurate, but it seems to have, well, it doesn't seem to, it has. It kind of smooths out a lot of the issues in regards to the distortions of the map. And then the Gall-Peter, people like it because it does equal area. Now, it distorts the shape of the things of the different land masses, but it does equal area, representation. And so people really like that because it more accurately portrays the size of the land masses, and especially if you look at the relationship between, say, the United States and Europe and Africa. People like that, and so they like the Gall-Peter projection for that particular reason. So that's really the whole thing with maps there. You're trying to create spatial perspective. Again, just like a regular map with map projection is not terribly important, but understanding the thematic maps and how you read those the differences between them. You know, I don't know that you're going to see a question on the AP test about you know, what type of thematic map this is, but understanding how to read those. You might see one on a unit test somewhere in your class, and so that would be important for that particular reason. There's been an article that I've had my kids read over the years. It's actually from the AP Central website, and I think it does a good job of presenting a definition for the course. And the definition is what is where, why there, and why care. Okay, so what is where, why there, and then why care. And so if you take that phrase and you take it throughout the course, I think that really provides you with a good direction on how you should analyze a lot of the different pieces, because it's the idea is what, and then the where. So the location of the what. Where is it located in space? Then asking yourself, why is that thing there in that space? So what is it that caused that thing to be in that space? And then why should we care about it? Why is that significant to us? Why do we need to study it? Those kinds of things. And so I think that it provides you a pretty good foundation for the course, the direction that you're headed. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as we go. Again, if you're going to join us, I see we got one person with us. That's great. If you have any questions, feel free to throw those out there, and I will address those the best that I can. Let's see here. Oh, and they went away. Maybe they didn't like being called out. I don't know. That's fine. All right. And so again, kind of the basics of the course. It is an AP course. I know there's a lot of freshmen that take AP Human Geography, and so one of the things that gives students a hard time, especially early on, is going to be the writing, the FRQs. And so what you want to do is probably early on take a look at FRQs and how those function. Take a look at how you're supposed to go out writing FRQs. They're really not nearly as difficult as a lot of people make them out to be. I think a lot of people make them, they turn into a much bigger process than it needs to be. I would say that's probably one of the easiest forms of writing in any of the AP social studies. All you have to do is address the question. So whatever the question is asking, you go ahead and answer the question. You don't have to worry about thesis statement. You don't necessarily have to worry about the structure of the essay or anything like that. You just answer the question. Normally it's an A, B, and C part. So just answer the parts as they come. So answer the A part, then answer the B part, and then answer the C part. You don't necessarily have to worry so much. A lot of people stress the verbiage of the question. Okay, so to explain versus identify and all those other kinds of things. Again, just really do what the question is asking, and you should be okay. And try not to overthink it too much. So one of the ideas that's found early on in the course that people have a hard time with is, and it has to do with that idea of spatial perspective, is going to be the idea of that's what's called friction of distance and distance decay. Throughout the course, you're going to talk about interactions between different spaces, because not only do we want to analyze in geography what's happening in a space, you also want to understand how different spaces are going to impact each other. And so there's a concept called friction of distance, and then there's a concept called distance decay. And so what that's dealing with is to what extent are different things impacting the space around them, and then other spaces outside of their space. So whether that's individuals, whether that's events, you know, whatever it happens to be, and certainly that's significant within the idea of diffusion. So friction of distance, distance decay, it's going to go along with, and let me just make some connections and I'll come back to it. So friction of distance, distance decay, obviously going to change when you have improved transportation technology, improved communication technology. So those things are flexible. They're not necessarily going to stay static over time. And so what friction of distance and distance decay are, friction of distance is simply the impediment that distance creates to the impact or the movement of ideas, goods, on the spaces around it. Okay, so the idea being that distance is going to create a barrier. So it's going to be a barrier to influence, it's going to be a barrier to movement, those kinds of things. And so with that, the idea being that the further away you get from the central location of importance, the greater the barrier is going to be. Okay, so it's going to create inertia. If you think in your physics class, you know, the idea of friction, and so there's a great amount of friction, especially in places where there's very low levels of communication and transportation technology. And then so distance decay is kind of the effect of that idea of friction of distance. The idea being that the further you get away from something, the less the impact there is. So friction of distance I always call as the cause. Distance decay is the effect of that. And so again, what's happened over time is that with improved communication, transportation technology, the idea of friction of distance and distance decay has become less and less important. Certainly in specific parts of the world, it's still going to have an impact. What's really interesting is if you look at, especially when we get into the urban unit, if you look at the connectivity piece and you look at urban hierarchies, the way that friction of distance and distance decay work as it relates to urban hierarchy and as it relates to the connectivity between urban spaces, and understand that there's greater connectivity between large urban spaces that might be further apart than there are between a large urban space and a moderate-sized urban space that might be closer together. So that's something really interesting to look at there. And so with that, friction distance, distance decay, you have what's called the space-time compression. So this idea being that absolute distances haven't changed, but relative distances have changed. And so what's happened with space-time compression is that we're able to travel further distances in shorter periods of time. Therefore, you have greater connectivity between places. There's less isolation in a lot of places, things along those lines. I really like the Rubenstein textbook does a good job, has a nice illustration of showing over periods of hundreds of years the different modes of travel and how long it's taken us to get from one place to the other. It starts with Columbus, and then it goes to the Titanic, then it goes to Lindbergh going transatlantic with his plane, and then it shows a space shuttle going around the Earth in low Earth orbit several times in a matter of hours. So the idea being that in the span of a couple of hundred years, we've gone from taking months to travel the Atlantic Ocean to being able to go around the Earth in low Earth orbit, in a couple of hours. So certainly a significant thing, especially as it pertains to travel in terms of economics, things along those lines, creating greater connectivity. So anyway, that's just a couple of ideas from Unit 1, some things that what I've found in the past people have a difficult time with. We're almost up on our time. Certainly what we're going to try and do is every Wednesday at 7:30. Feel free to pop in. Feel free to ask some questions. That's really the whole goal of this, is to try and interact with you guys. But if not, then I'll just try to go over a couple of concepts that people have found difficult, or things that I think that might be helpful to you. So I appreciate you guys watching, and as always, hope to see you next time.